Are some children just born smart, or can they be influenced by their environment? The nature versus nurture argument has a new piece of research to bolster it. Conducted by Professor Plomin from the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College, it concludes that genetic inheritance may have a larger bearing on a child's educational achievements as they grow up than school, teachers, parents, environment, nutrition and geographic location. And in an interview with The Spectator, Professor Plomin argues that the educational establishment has been too quick to dismiss the influence of genetics for fear of labelling children. Well, Professor Robert Plomin joins me now, along with Ian Balcombe, head teacher at Bennett Memorial School in Tunbridge Wells, Kent, and incoming president of the Association of School and College Lenders. Welcome to you both. And I wonder, Professor, if first of all you can just explain briefly how you carried out your research.
Yes, this involves the twin method, which compares identical and non-identical twins. And identical twins are like clones, so they're 100% the same genetically, whereas non-identical twins, like any brother and sister, are 50% similar. So if something like GCSE scores, in this case, are influenced by genetics, you'd have to predict that these identical twins are more similar than the non-identical twins. So that's the twin method. It's been used for a very long time. But what's new here is we've applied it for the first time to GCSE scores. We've studied all the twins born in England and Wales in 94, 95, and 96, and they're now at the GCSE level. So this is a study that reports the twin study results for GCSE scores for the first time. And what we find, much to my surprise really, is very substantial genetic influence. About 2/3 of the differences between schools are due to genetic differences between them. And in contrast, the amount of differences explained by schools, if you just put kids into those boxes of schools, you explain maybe 20% or 30%. So it's not really nature versus nurture that we want to emphasize. It's just that to ignore the biggest cause of differences seems to be a mistake.
So, if genetic inheritance does have a larger bearing on educational achievement than, say, school teachers, geographic location, then Ian Balcombe, might you just be wasting your time?
Well, I hope not. It's no surprise to me at all to learn that there are genetically determined variations between people. I think we've probably been aware of this for a long time, but it's a very interesting study, and if it throws some light on ways in which we might be able to use some of the insights of genetics to teach more effectively, then it'll certainly be useful. But that said, I think as an educationalist, what I would want to focus on is what is useful as a starting point for the enterprise of education. And to be an effective educator, you have to, above all, be permanently optimistic, inspirational, believe in the capacity of children to learn. And the shadow side of all of that, the dark side that we fight against, is a kind of deterministic view of young people that says some young people simply can't learn and can never make the sort of progress that we aspire to make with them. And so I'd want to guard against that.
Professor Plomin, isn't that deterministic aspect what you're bringing out here, though, that as a child gets older, his or her IQ becomes even more closely correlated with that of his blood relatives?
Well, first of all, we're not talking about IQ, so we're talking about school achievement. And I think most teachers recognize that children differ in how easily they learn and how much they have a thirst for learning. So I agree with Ian completely that we need to have schools provide the best possible environments, but we shouldn't think that it's going to be one size fits all, that it'll be the same for all children. And this research points out that genetics is one important source of differences between children. Doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. People are surprised to learn weight, for example, is substantially due to genetic differences. But you know, if you stop eating, you lose weight. However, we all know, having been on diets, that we tend to go back to some sort of level that's correlated with our other family members. So it's not deterministic in that sense.
No, but you are suggesting perhaps some form of genetic scanning may eventually allow schools to identify pupils with particular academic weaknesses or strengths, aren't you?
The whole field, the life sciences as a whole, are all trying to find specific genes, that is DNA that's responsible for this genetic influence. But it's been very hard to do that. We know that the effects we're talking about as genetic means that there's DNA differences between children that are ultimately responsible for their differences in GCSE scores. But finding them has been very difficult because there's many genes of very small effect.
But Ian Balcombe, is there a fear that youngsters could be labelled at an early age if you have that kind of genetic scanning?
Yes, I mean, I think if there could be genetic scanning that could identify people, young people who needed particular support in particular aspects of learning, and that could be somehow tailored in a very specific way to assist them, that would be a positive spin-off. But the fear of labelling is not out of some sort of political correctness about labelling children. It's because if you close down your view of children, if you have a closed mindset rather than an open mindset that believes that all children can achieve, then they are actually less likely to achieve. And that's something that we struggle against in education a lot. This terrible old adage that you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear is something that is really limiting in the enterprise of teaching. And I think we just have to handle research findings like this with great care to ensure that that's not the message that, poorly understood, is taken away from this kind of research.
So, Professor, just briefly, how could then your ideas, say, of genetic scanning be practically applied to a normal school?
Yes, I think it's something I really would like to see happen. Labeling is a problem, but children are labeled already. The whole of medicine is moving towards preventive medicine. So if you could identify children who are at risk, say, for reading problems earlier in life. We know all children who have reading problems, almost all, have language problems earlier. If you could prevent these problems, rather than waiting until children go to school and have lots of other associated problems, surely that has to be a good thing.
But Ian Balcombe, the suggestion from the professor is a system of personalised learning. But could you do that with 30 or 40 youngsters in a class?
Well, I don't think we're anywhere near that yet, either scientifically or in terms of pedagogy either. And you're right to point out that the practical difficulties of having a large school or large classes need to be considered. But, in due course, it may be possible. I don't know. But we must never label children and shut down the possibility that they have of achieving.
Ian Balcombe, thank you very much. And Professor Robert Plomin, thanks indeed.